Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing a book that's actually a little bit behind trend. I am a little bit late, but that is one of the unfortunate consequences of being a library reader. So today I am going to be reviewing The Dead of Winter, Beware the Krampus and Other Wicked Christmas Creatures by Sarah Clegg. So this is what the book looks like, the cover of it. I did listen to this in the audiobook format, so that's why I don't have a physical book to show you. And it is more of a Christmas book, but we are still in the winter season here where I live, so I feel like it was still pretty applicable. So I was finally able to get this. It was a book that I had my eye on for a while because everyone who read it over Christmas returned it, and I was able to give it a listen while driving around through beautiful winter scenery while doing a road trip last weekend. So I got around to listening to it. I think it's about 5 hours and I really enjoyed it. And even though it's a little bit behind trend, a little bit off my, I guess, search engine optimization, no one's searching for Christmas anymore, I thought it was still a fun book, so I'm going to review it and you can decide if the topic of this book is interesting enough for you to pick up. So if you want to look into maybe the dark side of Christmas, some of the mythology, or maybe something that skews a little bit more towards horror around Christmas, then I think The Dead of Winter would be a perfect book for you. It is about 200 pages or about 5 hours, and I was able to listen to it in all one drive. One drive split over the course of a weekend, and I was able to get through it relatively quickly, and I immediately collected my thoughts. So we're going to dive into some of the parts that I found most interesting, as well as some thoughts, and you can decide if this is a book that you would like to read yourself. So the topic of the book is to look at Christmas traditions that maybe skew a little bit darker, or to discuss the background behind some of these traditions, and to dig into maybe some of the sides of Christmas that aren't just holly jolly or consumerism or light and happy, which is what we tend to associate with the Christmas season. One of my big complaints with the Christmas season is that it comes so early in the winter, and then when it's done, we have this moment of like joy and happiness, and then we have a bunch of months of darkness and cold, and winter is still left to go. But I think the author does a good job at bringing in some of the darker sides of Christmas and indicates that there are some darker traditions associated with Christmas as well. The introduction, so just some of the key interesting parts that I found, I'm going to go through real quick. The first was the introduction, where she talks about the year's walk. This was a tradition that you can do where if you go on a walk, having not eaten, not looked into a fire, or not spoken to anyone, you can see who's going to die in the coming year. So that was just a little bit of a dark tradition. And she does a really good job setting the scene and making the atmosphere feel very believable. So I could already tell this was going to be a good book. And then each of the chapters in this book discusses a darker tradition, or maybe a monster that's associated with the Christmas tradition, or some of these other traditional things that are maybe a little spookier. So each chapter kind of focuses on one thing. Additionally, it's not just around Christmas as the commercial holiday it is now, or Christmas and in the sense of the Christian holiday that it's associated with, but it's a lot of traditions that have to do with midwinter or winter holidays. And this we can see at the very beginning with an introduction in Saturnalia, which was a Roman holiday about excess, and there was some ideas around flipping the social script during Saturnalia, which is discussed. The Saturnalia was a time that's kind of associated with carnival, with an upending of social order and masking, so people's identities are kind of hidden, although Sarah Clegg, the author, does make a good point that the social order was never truly upended, where those higher up could always get away with more than people lower in the social order. But from this idea of Saturnalia, which the early Christian church really pushed against, there's also the idea of lords of misrule, which would be someone who was elected who would be allowed to enact rules that all of their followers would have to follow. From this idea, we get things like king's cake, which you can still find in the store. I'm sure if you've been in the store on Christmas, that's where there's like, I've heard the one where there's like a baby in the cake. All of this stems from these traditions about this time where the social order can be upended. And things could really get quite raucous and crazy during Saturnalia. And these lords of misrule were quite crazy, I think is the best way to say it. And as already mentioned, the church did not really appreciate some of these associations associated with lords of misrule and some of the craziness and drunkenness and, I guess, debauchery associated with Christmas, where nowadays we have much more of a sanitized view of Christmas, where maybe Santa Claus comes and he's going to give some gifts, and then we go to grandma's, and then maybe there's a little Christmas brunch or a Christmas dinner that we eat, and it's much more sanitized. And she does mention how there was some sanitization processes that took place and things were kind of cleaned up around the Christmas tradition, because for a while there was a lot of craziness and some of these other associations like Carnival or Lords of Misrule that maybe weren't associated with the day of Christmas itself, but were these winter traditions that grew up. Of course, right in the subtitle is Krampus, which is probably the biggest one. Most people know about Krampus, which is this dark counterpart to Saint Nicholas. So if Santa is there to reward well-behaving children, what is there to punish misbehaving children? And that's where Krampus comes in. So there's the Salzburg Krampus event that she is able to go to, she being the author, and is able to attend and see that. And it's a dark counterpart that I would say probably Krampus is the best known darker counterpart to Christmas, so it is a name that's familiar, but something that she goes into is that Krampus actually went by many names, and it was a singular postcard. There was a singular event that popularized the name Krampus, and that's the one that stuck, as opposed to a variety of other names that have also been called, that this demon, this dark counterpart, has also been called. So that part was interesting too, just learning a little bit more about the history of the Krampus. Some other ones that were discussed include Lucy's Night, which was a night given in celebration to a Christian martyr that was celebrated in midwinter. Although Lucy and some associated legends and things similar to Lucy actually had a darker counterpart that included not to get too graphic, skip a few seconds ahead if you're really sensitive, like taking out people's innards and then sewing them back up if they weren't done with the weaving for the year. So there were some darker bits, and Lucy suffered, at least according to her legend, a very gruesome martyrdom. So she is celebrated has been celebrated in this time. Nowadays, it seems that this is more of a tradition in maybe the Scandinavian countries. Nowadays, it's not a candle, it's not candles on her head, but it's LED lights, so it's a little different. She's associated with going into catacombs and giving food to Christians who are hiding, and that's what she was killed for. So now we have a young girl who wears a wreath on her head, but she also has these darker traditions associated with her that I've already mentioned, of maybe penalizing people who aren't appropriately arranging their life or time managing their life so they're ready to celebrate her night when her night comes. And I think she was one of the people, but there were many other legends associated where people would remove innards and sew you back up with a chain if you weren't done. There were other, if I remember correctly, there were other people, so that wasn't unique to just her. There was other people or people like her who would have that myth associated with her. But something that stuck out about this Lucy's Night, and what stuck out about a lot of these traditions, including Christmas itself, is that a lot of these occur around midwinter, so around the winter solstice, the day where you have the least amount of sunlight in a year. And that might not be very important or meaningful to people who live close to the equator, or where there's not a lot of differentiation in daylight throughout the year, or places where there's warm weather throughout the year. But places that do not receive the same amount of sunlight throughout the year, where there's wide variation between summer solstice and winter solstice, I think there may have been some sort of, and this is not in the book, but this is me thinking now, there may be some sort of psychological component of something to look forward to around that time when it is so dark and cold in the year. So this midwinter celebration, and I wonder if people have done thinking about it, or someone smarter than me has written a book on this, about how maybe cultures that existed in northern or extreme southern latitudes developed traditions around midwinter to maybe break up some of the darkness that happened during the winter. So putting some sort of event on the darkest side of the year, or the darkest day of the year, as we switch and start moving towards an increase in sunlight, maybe putting some sort of celebration there had some sort of psychological impact. And I really wonder then if we see a lot more of these traditions developing around areas in extreme northern or southern latitudes versus cultures maybe that were in warmer areas, or areas that didn't have a lot of sunlight variation throughout the year, wouldn't have any or as much of a psychological need to put something at midwinter to kind of help them through that period of time. That is just me speculating, but that is the importance of midwinter and having celebrations in the winter seems to be repeated throughout the book. It is the theme of the book, but it's something that comes up again and again. And the book does mainly focus on Western Europe and Western European traditions, but I do wonder if, because a lot of those regions are regions that have extreme variation in sunlight, I wonder if there is more of a, again, psychological need or psychological desire to have some fun, have some Lords of Misrule, have a Saturnalia, or have something similar to that in the middle of winter to kind of break up the dreariness of living in a place that doesn't get a lot of sunlight. I live in a place, I do not live in an extreme area. I know there's places well above the Arctic Circle, or even countries like Iceland that have areas below the Arctic Circle, but that still get so little sunlight throughout the winter. I'm not in such an extreme place, but I am in a place where for a portion of the year you go to work and it's dark and you come home and it's dark. And it does take a psychological toll on you to go through several months of just it being dark so fast. And when it gets dark at 5:30 at night, there really is a component of needing to force yourself to do things, because you do just get more tired and you do just want to kind of stay in. And so having something like Christmas Now, or maybe like a Saturnalia or something else in midwinter, could be a big community boost that you could look forward to. Going into the importance of midwinter, she does take some time to discuss solstice occurring at Stonehenge and some of the things and the myths and legends associated with Stonehenge. And she talks about the danger about reading into myths too much and to trying to glean too much from what remains of folklore or legends or peasant traditions, I guess you could say. She talks a lot about these maybe folklorists, I guess you could call them, of like the 1800s and early 1900s, who tried to read way too much into this and tried to assume that anything that the lower class, for lack of a better term, were doing was somehow a remnant of pagan religion, and therefore, because they obviously couldn't invent anything new, and therefore they could read too far into it, but how maybe we shouldn't read too far into these midwinter traditions, and that some of them could just be these fun things that were created and they don't all harken back to this pagan time or this time of ancient people trying to have some fun around midwinter. Overall, I think the book was really interesting and fun. It was, again, like 5 hours, but it flew through. I flew through it. The book was really interesting. It kept my attention the whole time. I feel like it was introductory, but it was the perfect introductory level. We never got too deep in the weeds. We never really got off track too far. But if I wanted to explore anything in here further, I feel like I could go and find books based on what I know that could meet my particular interest. Again, what struck me is this need to have a little bit of fun around midwinter that also mirrors some of my own personal experiences growing up and currently living in a place that does have some sunlight variation throughout the year. So I would love to see if there's a book that explores that, and if there's any sort of research, or if I'm just making this up and, again, forming connections where there is none. I think the selection of mythology was really enjoyable. It is confined to this Western European region mostly, but I think that's the background that a lot of the viewers of this channel would have, or viewers of this channel might be able to connect to or might be familiar with. So I think it is a good selection. And if you're looking to inject some history, mythology, and horror into the Christmas season, then this book could be an enjoyable one for you. If you've read this book or have any thoughts or comments, please leave it in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.